Steven Seagal pushed open the door to Gene's Roadhouse Grill like a man returning to familiar ground. The Friday crowd buzzed with energy, voices carrying across the weathered wooden floor, while the rich aroma of grilled beef and mesquite filled the air. He hadn't visited this small town in months, not since wrapping his last film project. Tonight felt different, though. He needed somewhere quiet, somewhere real, away from the noise of Hollywood. The regulars noticed him immediately. A couple of older men at the bar offered respectful nods, quietly raising their glasses. A family in a corner booth smiled, and whispered the way people do when they're excited, but don't want to cause a scene. Steven acknowledged them with a polite nod as he made his way to his preferred spot by the window. From there, he could observe the parking lot, the entrance, and the long stretch of East Durant Avenue beyond. Old habits from his years of training never truly fade. Settling into the booth, he removed his jacket and glanced up as a young waitress approached. Her blonde ponytail was pulled back so tightly it looked uncomfortable, and she gripped her notepad like it might escape at any moment. Her name tag read Emily. "Good evening, sir," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Steven offered the kind of calm smile that put people at ease. "Evening. I'll have the ribeye, medium rare, with fries and collard greens. Sweet tea, no lemon." She scribbled frantically, her hands trembling just enough to make the pen scratch against the paper. In her nervousness, she dropped the order pad, and it slid partially under the table. As she bent to retrieve it, she bumped her head on the table's edge. "You all right?" Steven leaned forward, steadying her shoulder gently. Her face flushed red. "I'm fine. I just don't usually. I didn't expect." "No worries," Steven said softly, his voice carrying that measured calm he was known for. "It's just dinner. Take your time." She nodded quickly, secured the pad in her apron, and started toward the kitchen. But halfway there, she stopped. Her body went rigid, as if she was wrestling with a difficult decision. Finally, she turned and walked back to his table. "Mr. Seagal," she whispered, leaning closer. "How long are you planning to stay tonight?" Steven's eyes sharpened slightly. "Long enough to finish my steak." "Why?" Her lips parted, then closed again. She glanced toward the back corner, where 4 men sat in a large booth, watching without any attempt at subtlety. One had a shaved head and tattooed arms. Another sported a goatee and wore a smug half-smile. These were faces Steven recognized from other places, other confrontations. Emily lowered her voice until it was barely audible. "They don't want you here tonight." Steven didn't flinch or shift position more than a fraction. His eyes remained calm and steady, the kind of calm that carried weight. "Is that so?" She gave a tiny nod. "I thought you should know." Before Steven could respond, the front door opened again. A tall, imposing figure filled the doorway. Broad shoulders, platinum blonde hair, and the kind of quiet confidence that commanded attention. Dolph Lundgren stepped inside, his sharp blue eyes scanning the room with the systematic precision of someone who'd walked into more than his share of tense situations. "Dolph!" Steven's voice carried warmth and genuine surprise. Steven stood, his face breaking into the first real smile of the evening. The 2 men closed the distance between them with firm handshakes that evolved into the kind of embrace reserved for old friends who'd shared both battles and brotherhood. "Thought I'd surprise you," Dolph said, sliding into the booth across from Steven. His accent carried traces of his Swedish origins, refined by years in America. "Well, you succeeded," Steven chuckled. "People will be talking about this night for months." Emily looked between them, her eyes wide with recognition. For a moment, the warning she'd delivered seemed too heavy for her young shoulders, but Steven caught her glance and gave a reassuring nod. She managed a faint smile before heading back toward the kitchen. Dolph leaned in, lowering his voice. "Those gentlemen in the corner have been staring since I walked in." Steven nodded slightly, lifting his sweet tea as it arrived. "Emily says they don't want us here tonight." Dolph's eyes narrowed, calm but alert. "There's always a few who think they own whatever space they occupy." Steven sipped his tea, then set the glass down slowly. The ice clinked softly against the glass, the sound oddly prominent in the restaurant's hum. "Then I guess we won't make it easy for them." Dolph's slight grin conveyed understanding without need for additional words. Across the room, Logan Mercer leaned back in his booth, still smirking, but his restless finger-tapping revealed his true state of mind. Tonight wasn't unfolding according to his plans, and both Steven and Dolph could sense it. Steven allowed the moment to settle, then leaned toward Emily as she passed with another table's order. His voice was low and authoritative, the kind that commanded attention without aggression. "Emily, why don't you take a seat for a minute? We need to talk." She hesitated, glancing toward the kitchen doors and then toward the corner booth. For a second, she resembled a deer caught in headlights, uncertain which direction offered safety. But then she pulled over a chair, sliding into the booth beside Stephen. Her hands trembled as she set her tray on an empty chair. "I don't want to attract attention," she murmured. "If they see me talking to you too long, it could mean trouble." Dolph leaned forward, his large frame somehow managing to appear non-threatening despite its imposing nature. "Trouble's already in the room. The question is how much longer you want it to stay here." Emily swallowed hard, then glanced toward Logan's booth again. She dropped her voice even lower. "Those men have been coming here regularly for weeks. Always the same routine. They eat, they drink, and before they leave, they make sure everyone understands this is their territory. They leave threatening notes on tables, talking about how certain customers don't belong here. Sometimes they skip the notes entirely and just force people to leave." Stephen's jaw tightened, but his expression remained controlled. "What kind of people?" She hesitated, her eyes falling to her hands. "Veterans, families with children, people of color, anyone they decide doesn't fit their vision. Last week, an elderly gentleman came in wearing a Korean War veteran's cap. He sat right over there by the bar. 10 minutes later, those men surrounded him, told him the restaurant was full, and ordered him to leave. He walked out without finishing his coffee, and nobody said a word." Dolph's eyes went cold and steady. "They just ran him off." Emily nodded quickly. "They don't need reasons. Their justification is always the same, because we said so. They laugh about it, call it maintaining the right atmosphere. The worst part is that Gene, the owner, tried to stop them last month. He told them this was his establishment, not theirs. They broke his arm right there in the kitchen. He's still hospitalized. His son Travis is trying to keep the place running, but he's terrified. They warned him that if he makes trouble, it won't just be his father in a hospital bed." She paused, her voice growing quieter. "I know Logan from high school. He used to corner me in hallways, spread rumors, lock me in storage closets for entertainment. Everyone knew, but nothing ever stuck to him. His family had money and connections. He'd start fights, break windows, and somehow it would all disappear from his record. Now he runs a contracting business, brings his crew here, tips generously, and presents himself as a big shot. But I can see it starting the same way it did back then. Small intimidation, gradual escalation, and then suddenly it's out in the open. People like him don't stop once they taste control." Stephen looked at her steadily, his expression softening slightly. Dolph nodded, recognizing the courage it took for her to speak against someone who'd tormented her since adolescence. "You just did something most people wouldn't dare," Stephen said, his voice calm but full of respect. Dolph leaned back, crossing his arms. "Takes real strength to speak truth to power. Don't underestimate what you've accomplished." Before Emily could respond, a shadow fell across their booth. Logan Mercer stood there, his smile stretched wide like he was greeting old friends, though his eyes remained cold as winter. "Well, I'll be damned," Logan said, his voice smooth and falsely cheerful. "Steven Seagal and Dolph Lundgren. Never thought I'd see the day." Stephen didn't look up immediately. He took a deliberate sip of his tea before setting the glass down and finally meeting Logan's stare. "Evening." Logan chuckled, sliding into the empty chair without invitation. He leaned his elbows on the table, his grin wide, but his words dripping with false admiration. "Big heroes, big stars. I bet the whole town's excited you boys are here. Can't say I blame them. I grew up watching you guys beat up bad guys on the big screen." Dolph's eyes remained fixed on him, steady and unreadable. Stephen said nothing. Logan's grin tightened. "Course it's funny, isn't it? All those fights, all those stunts. People cheer like it's real. But it's just acting, right? Make believe. Two old men still playing dress-up for cameras." He leaned closer, his voice dropping while the smile never reached his eyes. "Out here, though, this isn't Hollywood. Out here, people like me decide what's real." Emily shifted uncomfortably in her seat. Stephen placed a calming hand on the table, silently signaling her to remain still. Logan laughed softly, shaking his head. "Don't get me wrong, I admire you both. Really. Takes guts to sell a fantasy that convincingly for that long. All that patriotic nonsense, all that tough guy posturing. The whole country bought it completely. Meanwhile, real men like me were out here handling actual business." Dolph finally spoke, his voice slow and quiet, but sharp enough to cut glass. "You talk extensively for someone who believes he's in control." Logan leaned back, smirking again. "Maybe I just enjoy reminding people which lane they belong in. Right now, your lane is entertainment. Not here. Not tonight. You don't fit the atmosphere we've established. With that, he reached out and ran his fingers through Dolph's blonde hair like he was petting a dog. The entire restaurant seemed to hold its breath. Before Logan could withdraw his hand, Dolph's reflexes kicked in faster than the eye could follow. He grabbed Logan's wrist, twisted it sharply, and in one fluid motion had Logan's arm bent backward at an unnatural angle, the joints audibly straining under pressure. Logan's smirk vanished, replaced by a grimace of genuine pain. You want to test boundaries? Dolph said evenly, his face inches from Logan's. Choose a different table. Logan's breathing became labored, his face flushing as he struggled to maintain his bravado despite the obvious discomfort. The room had gone so quiet you could hear ice settling in Steven's glass. You think this intimidates me? Logan hissed, sweat beginning to form at his temples. You're just actors. You'll be gone within a week. I'll still be here. Steven leaned forward, his voice calm and steady, carrying authority without needing volume. You might still be here, but after tonight, you won't be invisible anymore. Dolph applied one final sharp twist before releasing Logan's arm. Logan yanked his wrist back, rubbing it while trying to mask his discomfort with a defiant smirk. He stood slowly, his eyes darting between the two men. This isn't finished, he muttered. Not even close. Steven met his glare directly. We'll be right here. Logan hesitated, then turned and walked back toward his booth, his companions watching with tense expressions. The smirk never returned, but his jaw remained clenched tight enough to crack teeth. Steven allowed him to leave, though his eyes tracked every step. Dolph settled back in his seat, his expression calm, but his hands positioned as if ready to move at the slightest provocation. The two men sat quietly for a moment, letting the restaurant's normal sounds gradually return. Other patrons slowly resumed their conversations, though more subdued than before, as if reluctant to acknowledge what they'd witnessed. Their meals finally arrived. Hot ribeye steaks with fries and collard greens. Steven cut into his with unhurried patience, like a man who'd learned that rushing only led to mistakes. Dolph ate methodically, his eyes occasionally shifting toward the corner where Logan sat, ensuring the man wasn't planning any sudden moves. For a while, they simply enjoyed their food. Steven even managed a small smile. Almost like old times, he said, setting down his fork. Dolph gave a slight chuckle. Yeah, almost. Except for the company. They continued eating in comfortable silence, not uncomfortable, but steady like men who didn't need to fill every quiet moment with conversation. When they finished their meals and excused themselves briefly, they returned to find the corner booth empty. No Logan, no hunting jacket companions. The table sat cluttered with used napkins and a half-finished plate of ribs. But what made Steven's eyes narrow was Emily's absence. Her apron no longer hung at the service station. You see her? Steven asked quietly. Dolph shook his head. No, and I don't like it. That familiar knot of concern tightened in Steven's gut. Years of experience had taught him to recognize when danger shifted from potential to immediate. He retrieved his jacket and glanced toward the side door leading to the alley. They moved without apparent hurry, but their steps carried unmistakable purpose. Outside in the narrow space behind the restaurant, the summer night wrapped them in oppressive heat. The distant rattle of an air conditioning unit filled the air, and somewhere a dog barked several streets away. Then they heard it, a muffled voice, harsh and threatening, followed by a girl's voice, strained and pleading. Steven raised his hand, signaling Dolph to wait as he moved closer. Peering around the corner of the brick wall, he saw Emily pressed against the dumpster, her face pale under the weak lighting. Logan loomed over her, one hand clamped around her arm, the other roaming inappropriately. You think you can talk back to me? Logan hissed. You think you can whisper in their ears and I won't find out? I could have you fired with one phone call. You know Travis won't risk crossing me. Let go, Emily gasped, her voice breaking. Logan's grin turned predatory. You'll do more than that. You're coming with me tonight. We'll have ourselves some fun, and maybe I'll forget what I heard. Refuse, and you'll be packing your belongings tomorrow. You'll be nothing. You hear me? Nothing. Emily shoved against him, but he pinned her harder, his free hand tearing at her blouse until the fabric ripped audibly. That crossed the line. Steven stepped from the shadows, his voice low but carrying unmistakable authority. Let her go. Logan froze, then turned his head slowly while maintaining his grip on Emily's arm. His smirk attempted to return, but wavered at the edges. Well, look who came snooping. You just can't mind your own business, can you? Dolph emerged behind Steven, his presence like an immovable wall settling into place. She told you to let go, Dolph said flatly. Logan laughed, short and nervous, though he tried to conceal it. What are you going to do? Attack me? Two aging action stars assaulting a local businessman? That'll look great in tomorrow's headlines. Steven took a measured step forward, his eyes locked on Logan's. You think this is about headlines? You just crossed a line you can't come back from. For a moment, Logan's bravado cracked. He released Emily's arm, though not before shoving her back against the wall. She stumbled, clutching her torn blouse, tears streaming down her cheeks. Steven reached out, steadying her with one hand, while never breaking eye contact with Logan. Touch her again, Steven said, his voice calm as stone, and you'll regret it every morning you wake up. Logan's jaw worked furiously. He looked from Steven to Dolph, who hadn't moved an inch but radiated quiet menace. The combined presence of both men was more than intimidating posturing. It was final. You'll be sorry, Logan spat, stepping backward, his voice cracking despite his efforts. You don't know who you're dealing with. Dolph's tone was ice cold. Yeah, we do. That's the problem. Logan hesitated a moment longer, then spun on his heel, muttering curses as he stalked toward the parking lot. His boots hit the gravel hard, each step slightly faster than the last until the sound faded into the night. The alley returned to relative quiet, except for Emily's shaky breathing. She clutched her torn blouse, trying to hold the fabric together. Steven kept his voice gentle now, steady like a reassuring hand on the shoulder. It's all right. He's gone. Emily shook her head, eyes wet with tears. No, he's not. He won't stop. I know him. He's been like this since we were kids. Always pushing, always hurting, and somehow he always escapes consequences. I can't stay silent anymore. Steven looked at her with firm but kind eyes. Then you won't. Not alone. Dolph reached into his pocket, pulling out some bills and folding them into her trembling hands. This isn't charity, he said softly. It's gratitude for telling the truth when nobody else would. Don't ever think you're facing this alone. Emily tried to return the money, but Dolph gently closed her fingers around it. Keep it. You'll need it more than we do. She nodded, tears flowing fresh, though this time they carried something beyond fear. Perhaps relief. Perhaps the beginning of hope. Steven glanced down the alley where Logan had disappeared, his expression resolute. He thinks he owns this town, but tonight he learned differently. Dolph gave a slow nod. And we'll make sure he doesn't forget the lesson. They stood there for another minute, the hum of the air conditioner filling the silence. Emily wiped at her eyes with the back of her hand, pulling her torn blouse together as best she could. Steven offered his jacket, draping it gently over her shoulders without a word. She held it closed tightly, breathing slowly, trying to steady herself. Let's get you back inside, Steven said finally. Together, they walked back toward the restaurant, their steps slow but sure. Inside, the atmosphere had shifted noticeably. Conversations were more subdued, as though word of the confrontation was already spreading through invisible channels. Travis stood near the hostess station, pretending to review something on his clipboard, but his eyes shot up quickly when the three of them entered. His face went pale when he saw Emily clutching Steven's jacket around her shoulders. Emily, he said, too quickly, too nervously. What happened? You're supposed to be working the floor. Steven didn't give him time to fabricate excuses. He walked directly up to Travis, his eyes steady and unwavering. We need to talk. Travis shifted the clipboard, his grip tightening visibly. Look, if this is about your meal being delayed, I can. This isn't about food, Steven cut him off, his tone level but heavy enough to silence nearby tables. It's about what you're allowing to happen in this place. Dolph stepped up beside him, his presence quiet but immovable. The kind of thing that destroys communities if left unchecked. Travis swallowed hard, glancing around as if seeking an escape route. His voice came low but trembled at the edges. I don't know what you mean. There have been some misunderstandings, that's all. Kitchen's been busy. Orders get mixed up. Emily's voice cut through, clear despite its tremor. Stop lying, Travis. The room seemed to freeze. Every head turned toward her. She stood small under Steven's jacket, her hair loose from its ponytail, her face still pale, but her eyes steady now. You know exactly what's been happening, she said louder. Logan and his men come here every week. They leave threatening messages. They drive people away. They make this place their personal territory. They hospitalized your father when he tried to resist. And you? Her voice caught momentarily, then steadied. You've been enabling it. The restaurant's chatter died completely. You could hear a fork being set down 3 tables away. Travis's face flushed, his hands tightening on the clipboard. Emily, you don't understand. I'm doing everything I can to keep this place operational. If I resist them, they'll shut us down. They'll hurt more people. Steven stepped closer, his eyes never leaving Travis's face. They're already hurting people. You saw what they did to your father. You see how they treat your customers. And now you've witnessed what they just attempted with her. A collective gasp rippled through the crowd. Emily looked down, clutching the jacket tighter, but she didn't deny it. Dolph's voice came low and steady. The price of silence isn't peace. It's giving men like Logan permission to decide who matters and who doesn't. You think you're maintaining stability, but you're just letting the corruption spread. Travis's eyes darted around the room, landing on familiar faces now staring back at him. Some looked ashamed, some angry, but none appeared willing to pretend anymore. Emily took a step forward, her voice growing stronger. Every time you stay silent, you tell everyone else we're on our own. I've watched good people get driven away from here, and I've stayed quiet because I needed this job. But tonight, he tried to take more than my employment. If I remain silent now, it'll only get worse. For a long moment, nobody moved. The air hung heavy, the entire establishment waiting to see what Travis would say. He opened his mouth, closed it again, then tried once more, his voice cracking. I just wanted to keep this place running. I can't fight him. I can't fight all of them. Steven leaned forward slightly, his tone even and steady. You don't have to fight alone, but you do have to choose. Either you take a stand, or you let this place become his playground. There's no middle ground. The silence stretched thick and tense. Finally, Travis looked down, his expression drawn tight. He didn't answer, but in his eyes, there was no more denial. Only the weight of a man who knew the truth had finally been exposed. Steven straightened, his voice carrying enough to reach the entire room. This place deserves better, or at least it should. But nothing changes until somebody decides enough is enough. Dolph nodded once, his gaze sweeping the room. That's tonight's choice. Keep pretending, or reclaim what's yours. Emily stood taller now, her chin lifted despite the tremor still in her hands. She didn't speak further, but the fact that she remained standing said everything necessary. The truth was out, and silence could no longer cover it. When the last plates were cleared and the clock crept toward closing time, Steven finally stood. Dolph rose with him, his large frame moving with quiet authority that drew glances from the few remaining diners. Emily lingered nearby, reluctant to leave their protection. Go home when you can, Steven told her softly. Lock your doors. We'll see this through. Her eyes were wide with concern. He won't give up. Dolph gave a single nod. We know. They stepped outside into the thick night air. The parking lot was illuminated by a couple of buzzing lamps casting pale circles of light onto the gravel. Steven took a slow breath, scanning the shadows. Then they heard it, a truck engine low and menacing, approaching from the street. Headlights cut across the lot as a lifted pickup truck pulled in, tires crunching over the gravel. It stopped abruptly, aggressively close. Four doors opened simultaneously. Logan climbed out last, adjusting his belt like a man preparing for a show. His three companions stepped down with him, their faces grim, their eyes already locked on Steven and Dolph. One carried something at his side. Steven's eyes narrowed. A folding knife, previously concealed, now open and catching the lamplight. Dolph moved half a step closer to Steven, his voice low. They brought steel. Steven's response was calm and steady. So did we. The four men started across the lot. Logan's grin had returned, stretched wide, but his eyes carried genuine malice. Didn't expect you two to still be hanging around, he drawled. Figured you'd eat your steak and run back to Hollywood. Steven didn't move. You figured wrong. Logan's companions spread out slightly, forming a semicircle. The one with the knife twirled at once, showing teeth and a grin that didn't reach his eyes. Dolph stepped forward just enough to let the lamplight illuminate his face. The thing about bullies is they don't like exposure. Tonight's well lit. Logan snorted. Exposure? All I see are two washed-up actors thinking people still applaud for them. He leaned closer, his voice dropping to a hiss. This is my town, my rules, and you don't have the strength to change that. Steven's tone didn't rise, but it carried like stone rolling downhill. You don't own this town, and you certainly don't own her. Logan's smile cracked. He jerked his chin, and the man with the knife stepped forward. The parking lot seemed to shrink, the buzzing lamp loud in the sudden quiet. Steven's stance never shifted, but his body prepared. Weight balanced, eyes focused. Dolph rolled his shoulders once, then let his arms hang loose at his sides. The knife came first. The attacker lunged, blade flashing. Steven sidestepped, catching the man's wrist in one practiced grip and twisting hard. The knife clattered to the gravel. With a sharp motion, Stephen's elbow drove into the man's chest, sending him staggering backward, gasping for air. Another rushed in, wildly swinging. Dolph met him head-on, blocking the punch with his forearm, then sweeping the man's legs in one clean motion. The attacker hit the ground hard, groaning. Logan cursed and charged straight at Stephen. They locked up, Logan's weight significant, but Stephen held his ground. Logan swung, but Stephen's block came firm, his fist landing solidly across Logan's jaw. The impact echoed through the lot. Logan stumbled, but his pride forced him upright. "Come on then." Logan spat blood, his voice ragged. "You think you scare me?" Dolph had the third man pinned against the truck. The man's arm twisted back so severely he cried out. With a sharp shove, Dolph sent him sprawling into the gravel, then turned back, his eyes like ice. Logan grabbed a bottle from the truck bed, smashing it against the metal to create a jagged weapon. He swung it wildly at Stephen, the glass catching the light. Stephen moved in close, too close for the swing to connect properly. He grabbed Logan's wrist, forced it upward, and with one hard twist, sent the bottle flying from his hand, shattering uselessly against the ground. Breathing heavily, Logan tried another swing with his free hand, but Stephen blocked again, calm and controlled, driving his shoulder into Logan's chest and sending him back against the truck. Dolph stepped beside him, his voice steady. "Enough." For a moment, nobody moved. Logan's chest heaved, sweat dripping, his eyes darting between the two men. His companions were groaning in the gravel, one clutching his ribs, another trying unsuccessfully to stand. The knife lay 10 feet away. Stephen leaned in, his voice low but carrying enough for all to hear. "You think fear makes you strong, but you just learned it doesn't last when people stop bowing their heads." Logan's smirk faltered completely, his bravado slipping away. Dolph's words followed, sharp and final. "Cross that line again, and you won't be walking away." The parking lot hung quiet except for the buzzing lamp, the hum of night air, and Logan's labored breathing. Finally, Logan jerked his chin at his men. "Get in the truck." They scrambled up, beaten but not broken, pulling themselves inside. Logan climbed in last, his glare cutting back towards Stephen and Dolph. "This isn't over," he spat. Stephen didn't move. "It is tonight." The truck engine roared to life, tires spitting gravel as it peeled out of the lot. The red taillights vanished into the darkness, leaving the air heavy and still. Stephen stood there momentarily, his breathing steadying, his fists slowly unclenching. Dolph exhaled, rolling his shoulders like a man releasing tension. From the doorway, Emily stood frozen, her hand covering her mouth, eyes wide with both fear and relief. She stepped forward, her voice small but clear. "I thought they were going to kill you." Stephen gave her a small shake of his head. "They tried. They failed." Dolph placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "Bullies look intimidating until somebody stands up to them. Then you see what they really are." Emily's tears came again, but this time they carried something else. Something closer to faith. She nodded, pulling Stephen's jacket tighter around her shoulders. Stephen glanced at Dolph, then back toward the lot where the truck had vanished. "This town's been under their control too long. Tonight, we took it back." Dolph gave a slow nod. "They'll return, and we'll be ready." The three of them stood in the glow of the buzzing lamps, the quiet of the summer night settling around them. The fight was over for now, but the war wasn't finished. Yet for the first time in a long while, Emily looked like she believed it could be won, and that was enough to carry them into whatever came next.